Nice. First try.
Every time.
Every time. First time, every time.
Apart from those first couple of times, there was a learning curve.
That's how the sausage is made. You're not supposed to tell the audience that. Audience, you didn't hear that. Keith was lying. I just remembered that we actually got it right every time. So yeah, thanks for joining me for another episode of the That Chapter podcast. It's always a lot of fun to do with somebody else rather than me just talking by myself, because it's always more fun when you've to be joined by a pal, no matter what it is.
Absolutely. It's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Thanks for having me back. Is in a lot of heavy lifting there. All right, so what's new, Keith? I like to introduce with an anecdote because we're just shooting the shit. I don't like to raw dog it. I like to ease in, gentle, nice and slow.
Yeah. Bit of kissing,
bit of finger popping, all the good stuff. You don't want to bite the pillow. So what's new at you? Because we often have this thing where we're save for the pod. If you have any juicy morsels, if I would enjoy it, if it's just my ears, by all means, let her rip. But if it's something the audience might enjoy, let them hear it. Maybe they want to hear about what you got up to last night and your bowel movements and your sex life and everything. So that's the kind of stuff I would usually say, save for the pod.
Get down to the nitty gritty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
To be honest, this weather has been killing me, bud.
It is very hot.
I think we're going through like a, would you call it a heat wave?
I'd call it a heat wave. All of summer is a heat wave. Summer sucks. By the way, I'm going to turn off the light because it's very, very bright in here. For the audience to know, we're in where I record videos. We're looking at the nice black wall I painted. That kind of smells vaguely like puke because the paint is kind of disgusting. This will
be a quick episode.
This will be a quick episode.
We're getting in and
exactly. Don't worry, guys. We're going to get through this together. We've got my little pictures on the wall. And we're recording this on Tuesday, the 13th of June. Can you believe it? It's a hottie. It's a hottie out there.
It is. It's absolutely sweating.
BRB, you gotta turn that light.
Turn off the lights.
Yeah.
This is the problem with being Irish. If it's too bright, we are translucent.
Mm-hmm. We have that delicious grey skin that is the texture of moldy wallpaper. It's very good. So any cool horror-related things our little podcast friends might want to...
Horror-related things? I woke up in the middle of the night the other night.
Oh, yes. People want to hear about your haunted house, which we talked about in the, the New Orleans episode?
I woke up in the middle of the night the other night and I heard like a child singing, and it was like singing like Ring Around the Rosie. Terrifying. It was my daughter. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's not what you think. That's not what you go to. You think there's like a ghost singing in the middle.
Horror 101. That's was some sick shit.
Terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are creepy, man.
How did you stop yourself from grabbing your baseball bat and just going swinging for the rafters? I'd be freaking out.
How did I stop myself from going in and beating my child? Very easy, Mikey.
Clearly your house is haunted. Perhaps your daughter too. This is how all the movies start. Starts with the kids. They get possessed. We've seen this before. We're literally in one of those horror situations where you know what's happening, but they clearly don't know what's happening.
Maybe there'll be like a podcast in a couple of years using sound bites from this. And we're like, this is where it all began.
Fan footage, movie, Blair Witch, something. Well, the story we're telling today isn't found footage. This is the story of Alexander Pearce, the convict cannibal. Delicious. Oh, this is the second time we're actually talking about kind of cannibals. Last time we did a podcast was on Boone Helm.
That's true.
Which is kind of a similar-ish story to this one. Kind of. Yeah. This is more of a survival-ish.
They were kind of both survival-ish. With Boone Helm, he was out in the wilderness and he was eating people out of necessity. Same with Alexander Pearce, I guess. I mean, again, both, they kind of put themselves in the situation a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, absolutely right. Keith, you've done it again. So this is the... All right, let's get into it. The tale of Alexander Pearce begins all the way back in County Monaghan, Ireland. Ireland, if you can believe it. Do you think we should up our Irish accents for this episode?
Oh, I think so.
Oh, just this way.
Really fucking lean into it,
fucking hell. Yeah, so he's from Monaghan, which is not terribly far, actually, from where we are. Anything good to say about Monaghan? No? Okay, moving on.
I will say, everyone I know from Monaghan are, like, they're all nuts.
Oh, yeah. A good friend of mine in college, he was from Monaghan. And yeah, he was mad. He was a cool guy, but yeah, they're wild folk out there.
Nuts, yeah. Where I went to college, it was, like, right on the border. So we were quite close to Monaghan. And so we had a couple of heads from Monaghan in our course. And yeah,
big Monaghan heads on them.
Every single one of them. Nuts.
Wild, but there really is nothing to do in Monaghan other than just, like, go crazy, I think.
That's it, drink, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I got married in Monaghan.
You did, yeah.
That's, well, end of list, I guess. Yeah.
We had a good time there. It was
the whole thing of, like, going in, doing the ceremony, leaving.
It was a quick turnaround. Got in, got married, then left.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't even stop the car, you know. Empty the gas tank, let's get it.
It was like a drive-through wedding.
Yeah, pretty much. So, at the end of the 18th century, which is when we are in the year 1790, Ireland was actually enjoying a period of peace that would, you know, stand in kind of contrast to what was to come. The north of the country had begun industrializing and the south remained largely agricultural, and it had a good trading relationship with the Brits and exported large amounts of meat and butter. And at the start of the century, the Irish population was actually about 2 million. By the close, it would be closer to 5 million. And then the next, 50, 60 years, it would get closer to 8.
This was at a sweet spot in Ireland just before the famine.
Yeah, kind of just before the shit hit the fan. Because it was close to 5 million in 1790, and we just made it to 5 million, I think, about a month ago again. Our story takes place in 1790, but in about 50 years, there will be the Irish famine.
Actually, have you seen the weather?
Did you interrupt me, by the way?
But this is important.
Okay.
It's for good reason.
This is about the weather. All right.
It's about
Guys,
the weather.
I'm locked in. Keep this weather good.
There's a status yellow warning for this week for potato blight.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's happening again, buddy.
You're right. We're fucked.
Yeah, big time.
Oh, God damn it. Fuck. You heard it first, guys. We're screwed. During the Irish famine, 2 million people died. 2 million people emigrated.
Yeah, we took a hit.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much sucked. People ate all the potatoes, and the potatoes were all gone, so there was kind of nothing to eat.
There was a ton of cabbage, but yeah.
That was the thing.
Cabbage.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck cabbage. But that was the thing. Speaking of cabbage, there was actually a lot of food in the country. A lot of food. But it was just,
for us.
Not for us.
No.
The Brits. Ireland was a colony back then, so the British rulers just kind of took the food out of the country while we were all dying. So thanks.
That's another podcast episode, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's for we drink whiskey.
Yeah. Get angry.
It's all in good fun. It's all in good fun. We deserve to die, if you ask me. So, like most of the population time, Pearce, he was born and raised in a big old Irish Catholic family. He worked for most of his young life as a labourer on a farm, but it wouldn't be long before he found his calling in life. He put his ear to the wind, and it whispered, "Crime."
That was good.
Thank you. He was born to be a career criminal. As is often the case when you go back, in time as far as this one, records are kind of spotty to non-existent when it comes to the lowly people like Alexander Pearce. So essentially for most of his life, we have to draw a detailed picture of his character from the reports that were made about him, and there was a few, and it all started in 1819. That was when Pearce would commit a petty offence that would drastically change the course of his life, as well as several people unlucky enough to run into him along the way. Dun, 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 dun. Alexander Pearce was arrested, charged, and tried in very quick succession with the theft of 6 pairs of shoes.
Damn.
Yes. People will do anything for those Nike Air Max.
That's it, yeah, those Jordans.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we shouldn't be too harsh on old Alexander Pearce. All in all, a pretty small crime, but it would escalate dramatically. And so, for the crime of stealing 6 pairs of shoes, Pearce was to be transported to a penal colony in Van Diemen's Land. Yes, you heard me right, the hellscape that is Australia.
Little harsh.
I actually said it as a joke, but when you think about it, it's mostly like desert. They got snakes, spiders, sharks, jellyfish, crocodiles. I don't think humans are meant to live in Australia when you really think about it. And it's, it's incredibly hot.
I'm surprised the first settlers stayed as long as they did. Fair play to them though. They stuck to their guns.
They stuck it out.
Yeah.
I will say, fair play to you. It was a fate worse than that at this time being sent to Australia, which was pretty much one big open air prison. Being sent to Australia though, it was about as harsh as possible without actually being sent to a life sentence in prison or being just straight up the short drop sudden stop. It was pretty common to be transported for a petty crime, more so than a serious one. If you committed, like, you know, rape or murder, you were pretty much just put to death. They didn't even bother wasting how long it took you. And how long did it take you to go to Australia back in the day in, like, the 1800s?
Oh, about like 7-8 months.
7-8 months on this like tiny shitty little wooden ship. Like, it's been horrific. Australia must have actually seemed great by the time you got there, because you're like, thank God I'm off this ship.
Yeah, exactly. I can stretch my legs.
So Van Diemen's Land is the colonial name for what's now known as Tasmania. It was first established as a British settlement in 1803 and finally became a separate colony in 1825. Now, the penal colonies in Van Diemen's Land were notorious for their reputation as the most brutal and inescapable of all British penal colonies. The British had actually been using the idea of transporting their convicts abroad for forced labour for a long time before they actually began sending them to Australia. Like, prior to that, they would send them to America. They stopped doing that when the American Revolution happened. So they were sending all their prisoners to America, but then they needed to find a new America, which was Australia. And they also needed a hell of a lot of labour to establish the colonies in Australia, and so hence prisoners began. And over an 80-year period from 1788 to 1868, more than 150,000 convicts were sentenced to serve their time labouring in Australia's penal colonies.
I was going to say, it really was, like, for a lot of these crimes, because they were so petty, the journey itself was punishment enough. Like, it took about 7-8 months to get there, but they were usually kept in these tightly packed quarters below deck, where conditions they were cramped, unsanitary, they were uncomfortable. Some prisoners were often shackled or restrained to prevent escape or mutiny. And then living these conditions where, because they were extremely harsh, the prisoners, they had really limited space, and they were provided with minimal bedding and rations as well. Because of this, obviously, there was no sanitation, there was spread disease, malnutrition, illness, death. It's also worth noting that these vessels didn't carry just men either. Women and children as young as 12 were documented among the passengers en route to Australia's penal colonies. So not a good ship to be on.
No, Jesus, man, the women and children, that was...
Like with Alexander Pearce, you steal a pair of shoes, and then like 7-8 months in that ship alone should be punishment, and then you get to... And then it begins.
Exactly, and now, right, now you're sending it gets off as me.
Now your punishment starts, what?
Exactly, yeah, that was just the aperitif of the OL. And that was it for 150,000 people, you know, in this part of the world, in this part of Australia. And, you know, a lot of the emancipated prisoners, when they had served their sentence, they would stick around. They would move to the free parts, the free colonies of Australia, and then settle among the population there, which obviously is just a natural byproduct of the penal deportation system. See, a lot of people, you know, would have wanted to, all right, I served my sentence, I want to go back to Britain or Ireland or wherever it is they're from. But they couldn't afford it. Like, they would go to work in British settlements as labourers. I mean, well, we're not exactly going to get a good job as a prisoner. But it would just take so long to save up money to try and buy passage back to Europe that they just wouldn't be able to. And then they would just settle roots, and there you go, you're an Australian citizen now, essentially.
I can't imagine you're like too eager to make that trip back either.
Yeah, exactly. They're pretty just like, fuck that, I'm not doing that again. I'm taking my chances.
It's nearly a whole year. Like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it seems like your chances were not great of even just surviving it. And it just seems like torture anyway. And life in those early days of Australia was hard for even the free people. The land was completely different to, you know, what they were used to back in Europe. Farming, far more difficult. Way hotter. They didn't even have air conditioning, if you can believe that.
Shock. I don't have air conditioning, but...
Yeah, me neither. But, you know, you also don't live in Australia, so...
That's true, too.
Yeah. So life in a penal colony wasn't much fun, but, I mean, it also wasn't the worst. Like, there were levels to it. If convicts behaved, they were ultimately set free to join the population. If they misbehaved, well, even the most minor rule breaches could end up leading to a person being stuck in a never-ending cycle of torment, often with disproportionately severe sentences for even the most minor infractions. Punishments dished out on a regular basis ranged anywhere from being forced to wear leg irons while working, to whippings, or even solitary confinement. Much like today, once in the system it wasn't easy to get out, and since the colonies were always in need of more and more labour, the British government was only too happy to keep shipping prisoners out. It's so warm in here.
It is. I'm absolutely sweltering.
Do you mind if I open the windows? Okay.
No, dude, work away.
For the listeners, if it becomes loud, it is just unbearably hot in here. And it's like, it's almost 10 p.m. We're recording this now, and it's still so warm.
Look, like, we're bitching, but, like, let me check the temperature.
It is a whole 13 degrees.
It's probably not even that hot, like, 19 at the moment.
19 degrees.
It's so hot.
It is very hot, very hot. Open a window. If you hear beeping and a roaring and a hollering from outside, just ignore it. That's all I can do. Sorry.
But I was looking up Alexander Pearce's time while he was there, and he was quite the troublemaker. He was a minor rule breaker, as you were saying. On May 16th, 1821, he got busted for nabbing 2 turkeys and 3 ducks. The consequences? A whopping 50 lashes. Yeah. But that wasn't his only brush with trouble. On September 17th, 1821, his antics while being drunk and disorderly, coupled with a disappearing act from his lodgings, earned him another sentence of 25 lashes. And not one to learn his lesson, Pearce continued his misadventures on November 26th, 1821, where his rowdy behaviour and sticky fingers for stealing some wine led to yet another round of 50 lashes.
Got some sticky fingers for you right
he
here.
He does,
pal.
yeah. Oh. That's the heat. I hope, anyway. To top it all off, on November 29th, 1821, Pearce's audacious act of swiping a wheelbarrow resulted in, you guessed it, another 50 lashes, and if that wasn't enough, he was sentenced to 6 months in the jail gang.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was probably like breaking rocks and shit, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, these was hard labour. Yeah. For 6 months. Like, he was already doing hard labour. So it's harder labour.
Exactly. It's almost like, why would you... Like, I get he was a rule breaker, but this is so shit. You think you'd be like, I'm not breaking any rules. Like, this sucks.
I can see the turkeys and the ducks and the wine. Why the wheelbarrow?
Yeah, exactly. I think he was just...
Unless he was going to get more turkeys and ducks.
Yeah. I mean, he was sent here for stealing shoes, so I guess he was like, maybe I'll steal a wheelbarrow.
Yeah, maybe just had a compulsion.
Yeah. But that wouldn't be Alexander Pearce's fate for long, or at least for a short while, because he would escape. Little is known about the details of his great escape itself. What we do know, and this is where the legend of Alexander Pearce is born, on the 20th of September, 1822, Pearce, along with 7 other inmates, successfully fled the confines of the settlement. It seems that the men had all gotten sick of the repeated beatings, as you were talking about, and floggings for every offence, which, as you said, were just given pretty much for, for stealing, but also even for them just looking at jailers the wrong way, or seems not pulling their weight enough. Death was a familiar sight to the men who lived in the colonies. In 1824, a prisoner named Trenham literally murdered another prisoner just to be put to death, rather than suffer through the rest of his sentence. That's pretty mad. He's like, kill me, do it, I mean, kill me. So to put it simply, they all basically thought things couldn't be any worse. They'd rather take their chances in the bush than stick around for any more of this shite.
I like to think they escaped in the same way they did from Escape from Alcatraz. However, instead of using papier-mâché heads to fool the guards, Pearce, being a spudhead from Ireland, just used a potato. Maybe with some eyes stuck on it.
Drew a smiley face and a potato. Like, yeah, it's me.
It took them weeks to figure it out.
So they made a run for it into the Tasmanian bush. Now, what they didn't know was that this was not a very good idea. It was an intense and harsh reality out there. Like when you think of Australia, you're probably thinking of deserts, the bush, Ayers Rock, all this endless kind of like wilderness. Tasmania is quite different. Tasmania is like kind of jungly and very, very dense forests. It's so dense you can't even see the sun at times. Probably even worse to navigate than a desert, because at least in a desert you can see the sun and you can map out east-west. In a jungle you can't even see the sun. You have no idea where you're going. And it's also harder to walk in because, it takes you longer to get further.
In a desert you can see you're fucked. Where in a jungle it's like, there could be something around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. Hope. That's the worst thing. Don't do that. Don't give me hope.
But it was, and still is, a visually stunning place. There was one Irish prisoner wrote the following about Tasmania when they arrived. He said, to find a gale in one of the loveliest spots formed by nature in one of her loneliest solitudes create a revulsion of feeling I cannot describe. So, some mixed emotions there.
Wait, he said revulsional feeling?
Well, I guess it's just because it's a lovely spot, but then also he's going to jail.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought he was talking about Tasmania. He was like, oh, screw this.
No,
I'm saying talking about the jail. That was
it's such a nice area. It's a shame to have a jail in it.
Yeah, that's very sweet, but also kind of like, okay, cool. So Tasmania, and in fact the vast majority of Australia, they had yet to be fully explored, let alone charted and mapped. One former escapee of Macquarie Harbour in Van Diemen's Land, James Goodwin, had even been pardoned and employed to help document and properly map out the same bush he'd previously trekked to when he was escaping. Many people, including prisoners, thought that China was just a short hop away from Van Diemen's Land. Some thought there's even just a river between Tasmania and China. Boy, were they wrong.
They were like so far off what we're thinking.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of ridiculous. But that was what the rumor was saying. Oh, guys, China's just over there. We can make it. We can make it. And that's what people were doing. They were like, all right, we're going to go to China. Pearce himself considered China was where they were going. We're going to get to this jungle and China's like right there.
Like the closest mainland to Tasmania is Australia. And that's separated by a passage of water called the Bass Strait. So maybe they thought that was the river. And that's like, I don't know.
How far? Like, it's pretty big though, like the distance separating Australia and Tasmania.
Yeah, like there was only one person who actually ever managed to swim this.
Oh, wow.
It is actually within our lifetime. It was in 96. It was an endurance swimmer named Tammy Van Wise. She completed the world record of swimming from Kings Island, Tasmania to Apollo Bay in Australia. But it took her 17 hours and 46 minutes to complete. So even if by like some act of God, the prisoners managed to make it across the Bass Strait, they were still only in southern Australia, which is still like 7,000 kilometers from China.
Yeah, you're going to be walking for a while.
Yeah, they were so far off of their
But
navigation.
you know what? God bless Pearce. That was his plan. He was going to steal himself a boat and sail off to Australia. So he was in for a bit of a surprise. So they set off into the Tasmanian wilderness. And just to tell you, like in modern terms, what the Tasmanian wilderness was like, in 2009, a group of 6 members of the Tasmanian State Emergency Search and Rescue Service, they set out to trek the same journey Alexander Pearce and his companions had undertaken. In an Australian Geographic article documenting their journey, the men described the hike as akin to... Wait, I should do this in an Australian accent. Akin to doing an all-day gym session carrying a heavy pack while taking a shower. Cut that. I thought that was pretty good.
I like it.
It sounded so good in my head.
Try it again.
Okay. Akin to doing an all-day gym session, carrying a heavy pack while taking a shower. Better?
Nailed it.
Bearing in mind, all these guys were in the emergency service, so they're all pretty fit as shit, if you want to say it that way. But yeah, they said it was really, really tough. So you can imagine, what these 8 escapees, Pearce and the 7 others, had to go through when they had pretty much nothing at all. They probably were all malnourished. And etc., etc. And the time of year Pearce and the 7 others had chosen was probably one of the worst times of the year. September in Tasmania often brought rain, hail, and snow, sometimes making the journey all the more arduous. In the end, Pearce was free for over 100 days before being recaptured. When he was taken into custody, he had an absolutely horrific story to tell. He was asked to make his confession, and so a priest was sent to hear it. Pearce, along with his 7 compatriots, John Mather, Alexander Dalton, Edward Brown, Matthew Travers, William Kennerly, Thomas Bodenham, and their de facto leader, Robert Greenhill, all managed to flee into the Tasmanian bush. But only Alexander Pearce came back.
It really was a very impressive feat that they did make it that far, though.
Yeah.
Because when they left, they'd like absolutely zero supplies. And the governor had actually come up with a funny little rule forbidding the cooking of biscuits. Or as they were known back then, hardtack. The reason behind this peculiar ban was the biscuits were considered escape food. So they had a long shelf life, making them perfect for stockpiling in preparation for escape. So if you were planning to break free, don't forget to pack your forbidden biscuits. But Pearce and the 7 other men, they had nothing but a shirt on their back when they left. And I know Pearce only made it out, but the fact that they made it quite a distance.
Yeah.
Having absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's quite impressive. And so they set out, as I said, Robert Greenhill was the leader of this little gang. He was the one taking charge. He had some skills, navigation skills, being a former seaman. But it didn't take long for him to get all of them to get like completely lost in the dense jungles.
It's because they're on land, not the sea.
Yeah, I know. He was like,
damn it, Greenhill.
Damn, if I was underwater, I would have saved us all. Robert Greenhill, why he was the leader? Pretty much, he had the axe. It was literally one of those like, he had the biggest rock. So I'm taking charge here, pretty much. So it's like, yep. And him and his best buddy, Matthew Travers, they were essentially the leaders, the 2 of them, but Robert Greenhill, really. He became friends with his buddy, Matthew Travers, because they'd been sent to Van Diemen's Land together for stealing a boat when they'd previously attempted to escape from the Australian colony. And so, The 8 men set out. Unfortunately for the men, the escape had taken place in the middle of a work shift on the east side of the island. And so they hadn't, as you said, any time to save up any supplies. Perhaps they presumed they would find civilization before too long, or that they could fish, hunt, forage to survive. They hadn't realized quite how difficult bush life would be, especially when you were unprepared. It's not exactly, Bear Grylls over here.
Just drink your own piss, lads.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what Bear Grylls would do.
Exactly. Always drink your own piss. First up, own piss.
But they, as you were saying, they really severely underestimated the thickness and density of the bush, failing to grasp the true extent of the challenge. The cause of their misjudgment was the presence of, have you heard of the horizontal scrub?
Tell me more.
So it's a slender and abundant tree species, notorious for obstructing travellers in Tasmanian rainforests. So its name derives from its tendency to grow vertical, and then the branches eventually collapse, forming nearly layers of dense vegetation. Historical records recount instances of explorers and mineral prospectors precariously treading on elevated platforms of horizontally positioned branches, unaware of the ground actually 7 meters below them.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. So you're walking on, you think this is like the forest floor, this bed of branches and stuff, but actually the forest floor is meters and feet below you.
There is even accounts of mossy and decayed branches that would eventually send them plummeting into the depths of the forest, sometimes resulting in fatal outcomes. So you just be going up, I guess, what you think would be a hill, and then all of a sudden you'd snap through some decaying branches into darkness.
Yeah.
And you'd just be in the middle of this dense forest again, lost.
Yeah, no way out, man. That's scary. And that's what they went out into. And I imagine all those branches, they would almost form little barriers and walls and stuff like that. It was like a maze.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can't even see the sun for a lot of it because it's so thick. Man, it kind of sucks. Not gonna lie, I would poo-poo that idea. You're getting a big old thumbs down from Mike over here.
Not even the Aboriginal Tasmanians live in that area. That
really?
The convicts are trying to walk through. They didn't live there. They'd use it for quick passing to get through somewhere, but they wouldn't live there.
They survived along and they were yeah, no, we're not dealing with this shit.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Alexander Pearce and the 7 others went into. And in all fairness, they didn't do too bad. They went 15 days before hunger got to the point where they were desperate enough to, do anything to eat. According to Pearce, they were all close to delirium and decided that in order for the majority of the group to survive, one of them must die. Whether it happened as Pearce told it, we will never know. All of the story is taken from Pearce, and he told this story 3 different times, and the details varied every time, but the bulk of the story was the same every time. But according to him, the group decided to draw straws, and whoever drew the short straw would be killed, and the others would be eaten well that evening. The 8 men drew their lots, and it was Thomas Bodenham who came up short. I wonder what that must feel like.
Best out of 3, lads?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. This one is not working. Let's do another. Man, it must suck, though, if you get the short straw. I'd be
just knowing, yeah.
Yeah, knowing. All right. Shit. So the killing duties went to the man with the axe, the leader, Robert Greenhill. And
he was just dying to use it.
Oh man, he hit this axe, he was itching to use it. And he had no problem murdering, killing, I don't know what you'd say. Would you say that is murder or killing?
Yeah, it's murder.
I'd say it's murder. Maybe Thomas Bodenham was all right, go for it, lads.
Yeah, it's still murder though.
Yeah, I guess so. And so they murdered, Keith's words, not mine, Keith's words, Thomas Bodenham. That did scare the shit out of some of the others. Dalton, Kennerly, and Edward Brown. They were actually, we're going to leave. They didn't even stay for the food. They saw Greenhill kill Thomas Bodenham and were okay, the prison wasn't that bad. Better than this. The 3 of them took off, and Kennerly and Brown eventually returned to Van Diemen's Land. They returned to the prison. 3 of them left. One of them, Dalton, didn't come back. This is likely what happened. They were scared of watching one of the guys kill another guy so they could eat him. They were alright, fuck this. We're not taking part in this. We're gonna leave. Probably at the other guy then.
Yeah,
they were shit. Dalton, they said he died of hunger and exhaustion on the way back. Wink, wink. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Who knows?
I wonder if they left because it kind of seems like Greenhill did it with such ease.
Yes.
That might have been more terrifying than actually having to eat. It was just
he was raring to kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
and he was I'm not sticking around that guy.
Yeah, exactly. They were more scared of him than...
I'll kill my own guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Back at Camp Outlaw, the remaining group of Pearce, Greenhill, Travers, and Mather chowed down on the sadly murdered Thomas Bodenham, and they were safe from starvation for at least a while. Quite what was going through Pearce's head when he was tucking into old Thomas's thigh meat, impossible to know, but you gotta wonder if it was like thinking, all this for a pair of shoes. That's it. So with their tummies full of Thomas, the 4 newly anointed cannibals continued on their journey towards freedom. They were still on their way to China. The river is just around the corner. We're right around there, and it's a short little swim. Having a great time.
We'll put us all behind us.
So now there was 4. Pearce, the other guy, and Greenhill and Travers. Pearce, Mather, Greenhill and Travers, right? And Pearce probably realized at this point, with the 4 of them, that Greenhill and Travers, they were best friends. They were the 2-man team. They had gone to Van Diemen's Land together, been sent to Van Diemen's Land together. So now there was pretty much Pearce and Mather, and Bear was like, yeah, they're definitely going to team up and kill one of us. So it's either Pearce or Mather is next, right? It's not going to be Greenhill or Travers, they're friends. And one of them has an axe.
I wonder how much time they had between, by the time they killed the first person, to how long they get hungry again and need to kill another person. I wonder how many days it was.
Probably, I'd say about a week. Well, they were gone for, 50 days altogether? And it was 15 days before they started.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's probably about a week in between, maybe-ish. So, not particularly relishing the idea of being a happy meal for the others, Pearce decided it was, well, hey, you're gonna team up with the strong people, of course. He buddied up with Greenhill and Travers. The last of Thomas finished, the men eventually got peckish enough that the time came to choose the next meal, boys. Well, meat's back on the menu, boys.
Nice.
According to Pearce, Greenhill then, quote-unquote, prepared Mather, and the remaining 3 butchered his remains, eating some right away, saving and packing out the rest for the next leg of the journey. Before Mather's was even dead, let alone parts of him settling in his companions' stomachs, Pearce already knew he was fucked. Now 3 of them left, and again, Greenhill and Travers best friends. They were loyal to each other. Pearce knew he was next. But ironically, it was a combination of the bush itself and plain old dumb luck that saved Alexander Pearce. With their supplies of Mather's coming to an end and still no sign of, journey's end in sight, Travers, he was bitten on the foot by a snake. Obviously, the men had no idea what kind of snake it was, but whichever one got him, it wasn't the good kind. So, with no anti-venom or even any treatment at all, Greenhill, the leader, insisted that Alexander Pearce help carry Travers along the journey for a whole 5 days after he had been bitten, where just walking by yourself would have been difficult enough. He had to carry him along the whole way. The fact that Greenhill had insisted on dragging Travers along for days, that just proved to Alexander Pearce that the stroke of luck that Travers hadn't been bitten, he definitely would have been killed.
Maybe it was luck. Maybe Pearce summoned the spirit of St. Patrick to attack Travers with one of his snakes.
I like that. I like that a lot. I definitely think that's what happened.
I guess we'll never know, but but that's definitely what happened.
That's definitely what happened. And if you disagree with it, you're just plain wrong. I don't know what to tell you.
All Irish people can summon snakes. That's why St. Patrick had to banish them. It was too much for power.
Yeah, exactly. We were too powerful. That's what they'd say. But in the end, Robert Greenhill, he had to admit defeat. Travers wasn't going to recover. In fact, he was just slowing him down with his rotting off foot from a snake. The decision was made, and he killed his friend. And once again, Greenhill and Pearce chowed down on his meat, tenderized with lovely snake venom, no doubt. Now there was 2. They packed on, continued going. After weeks of trudging through the brush, it came down to Greenhill and Pearce. And, well, we're not going to talk much about Greenhill anymore, so you can probably guess what's going to happen. Both men became incredibly paranoid of each other. They wouldn't even turn their backs on one another. And in the end, it essentially came down to a mega staring contest, and Greenhill blinked first. Overcome with exhaustion, Greenhill fell asleep, and Pearce knew he had his only chance to survive. He grabbed the axe and brutally and efficiently slayed Greenhill while he was sleeping. Pearce, now, it was just him chowing down on a whole human, and that would last him a little bit, but, his situation was getting worse and worse. He knew that, essentially, he has to find a settlement soon now. He had no more humans to kill, so it wouldn't really matter.
He was all alone.
He was all alone in the jungle. But the old luck of the Irish was on Pearce's side once again. He came upon an Aboriginal campsite, and he raided it for food and supplies. Very soon after, Pearce must have thought he won the lottery when he came across a whole bunch of sheep. He took a lamb for himself, and it was the first time he sat down with a meal he hadn't previously had a conversation with. However, then the shepherd approached. And thinking, all right, I'm kind of screwed now. Like, the shepherd's gonna send me back. It actually turned out he knew the shepherd. Randomly, he was a mate of his. He was like, oh, hell yeah.
Oh, Jace, Pearce.
Yeah, really, really weird. He knew the guy. He was like, just randomly happened to know him.
That's amazing.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Like,
the only thing he needs to do now is stumble across an Irish pub in the bush.
Yeah, exactly. You have a nice point.
Yeah.
This old pal of Pearce, he confirmed that he'd reached the settled districts. And even better, he'd give Pearce some work. Of course, being a criminal, that would have been, illegal. But hey, it's hard to get good work these days. So, after spending a little under 50 days in the wilderness of the Tasmanian bush and eating 3 other people.
We've got magic too, We can make them disappear.
That's me lucky charms.
They're magically delicious.
During this time, Pearce, he really was living his best life. The 3 men, they shared land with the Big River tribe. Pearce, while he was there, he may well have witnessed rituals held around a special tree in this part of the world. The tree was called the cider gum, and it is a species of large tree native to the island of Tasmania. And Aboriginal people, they tapped the trees to allow sap, resembling like maple syrup, to collect in hollows in the bark or at the base of the tree. And then the ever-present yeast that would ferment the liquid to make it alcoholic.
Wow.
Into like a cider-like beverage.
That sounds cool. I want to try that.
Right? So like alcohol was literally coming out of trees.
He did have a look at the Irish. But then, in the May edition of the Hobart Town Gazette, a £10 reward was offered for bringing Alexander Pearce in. He was a wanted man. £10 back then? Serious chunk of cha-ching.
Mm-hmm.
Pearce was arrested. He was taken back in along with 2 other convicts, William Davis and Ralph Churton, both of whom were hanged for bush ranging and fleeing a military escort. Pearce, he was locked up in a jail prior to being transferred to a colony, and it was there that Alexander Pearce had the urge to clear his conscience, and he sent for a priest to hear his confession and tell his story about what he had been up to in the Tasmanian bush. Alexander told a story, grisly details of human butchery and cannibalism and up to all sorts. And what was their reaction to the story? That's a good one.
Yeah, fuck off.
Literally, I was like, he did not believe a word. This guy thought that Alexander Pearce was bullshitting this whole story and that his friends were still out there and were living as bushrangers somewhere in the wilderness.
Trying to convince someone, no, I ate them.
I call him bullshit on this one, pal. And so he wasn't hanged. Only the indigenous people that they kicked off the land, the people who they colonized, the savages, would become cannibals. So that's probably one of the reasons why they didn't believe Alexander Pearce when he told them the story. They were like, no, you're not a cannibal. You have to be some indigenous savage native to be cannibal. So they just simply didn't believe him. He didn't get off scot-free, though. As a result of his escape, Pearce was transferred to one of the most inhospitable places, seriously, probably the worst place at that time, on Earth, called Macquarie Harbour Penal Station on Sarah Island. Now, Macquarie Harbour lies within Van Diemen Land itself, and it was reserved for repeat and the very worst offenders. Think of like Van Diemen's Land as a huge prison. Sarah Island was like the secure wing for high-risk offenders. Macquarie Harbour was regarded as the worst of all the places to be sent. Food couldn't be produced on the land, so malnutrition and scurvy were very, very common. Corporal punishment, routine. And so it's not surprising that Pearce, after being sent there, he was desperate to escape once again. And Sarah Island's remoteness, it's about as extreme as it gets, especially in those days. It was thought to be inescapable purely because there was nowhere to escape to. Even inside these settlements and outposts, supplies were seriously limited. So once, you could, even if you even managed to escape the guards, you would pretty much die anyway.
I think they kind of did it on purpose with, like, you were saying like it was a barren land, but I think when they set up this whole thing, they made the land barren purposely for this. They just made it completely inhospitable.
Yeah, like, this land sucks. How can you make it even worse for prisoners?
Right. Yeah.
So you would think that, Pearce freely admitting to killing and cannibalizing people, and he had already successfully escaped, that, he might be put under, an extra eye. Not at all, because less than a year later, on the 13th of November, 1823, Pearce managed to flee the camp once again, and this time he had a companion, a young convict named Thomas Cox. Cox was from Worcestershire, and he was only 21 years old at the time of his escape. And he had been transported to Van Diemen's Land in 1819, the same year as Pearce had been sent there. Cox was sent to Sayre Island for repeatedly breaking the rules and aiding several escapees. Far from the 100+ days Pearce had managed earlier, 50 days in the bush and over 50+ living on the land, being a farmer, whatever. This time he only managed less than 10 days. And his companion didn't even make it that long, because Pearce, once again, came back alone. He was caught and taken into custody by a bush patrol on the 22nd of November, 1823. According to Pearce, he and Cox had made it all the way to the King's River when he suggested to Cox that they swim across the river. Cox couldn't swim. Apparently, this was news to Pearce, and he flew into a rage and then just murdered Cox, which was, I guess, a favourite hobby of his, because then he chopped him up, started chowing down, and put bits of Cox in his pockets. His pockets were full of Cox, if you know what I'm saying.
He really was settling nicely into the whole cannibal lifestyle, though.
He didn't need to kill him. He wasn't that hungry. He just kind of did it because he wanted to.
Why not? Also, what was Cox's plan? I'll figure it out when I get there, maybe.
I mean, it's an island. Like, you'll probably have to swim to get off
At
here.
some point, you're going to have to swim, like.
Yeah, maybe you don't need to find a boat. I don't know. But it's clear at this point that Alexander Pearce, he had the hunger.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, the Wendigo inside of me.
The taste of man flesh.
Yes, the man flesh.
That's me lucky charms.
Delicious.
Man flesh.
When he was taken in, Pearce once again readily confessed to murdering and eating Thomas Cox, and he also reiterated his confession of the killings during his earlier escape. But this time, there would be no escaping justice. This time, they had clear and obvious evidence that Pearce was telling the truth the whole time. Not only did they have the remnants of human flesh in his pockets, but Pearce had actually led his jailers to the mutilated remains of Cox's body. Ultimately, Alexander Pearce would be tried and found guilty of murder at the Supreme Court of Van Diemen's Land in Hobart. And there could only be one sentence: death by hanging. Before the sentence could be carried out, Pearce made one last confession. This was to the colonies priest, Father Philip Connolly. Once again, he reiterated his story.
Jesus, I've eaten so many people, I forget sometimes.
At 9 o'clock in the morning, on the 19th of July, 1824, Alexander Pearce was given his last rites by Father Connolly before he was executed by hanging at Hobart Town Jail. And thus ended the saga of Alexander Pearce. Normal guy, stealing a few shoes, then full-on murder, full-on cannibal. Yep. Just if you have any thoughts to add as I'm getting into the end of the story, feel free to add in.
No, it's just a mad story. It's crazy that it started off with such a simple act of stealing shoes.
Stealing shoes and sent to Australia. Yeah, I mean, the system of penal colonies, by the way, just a fun fact, it continued until 1968.
Jesus.
The transportation of prisoners continued until 1968. It's actually kind of crazy to me that it continued that late.
Yeah.
Like, I thought, like, it's sometime in the 1800s.
Not that long ago at all.
No.
Yeah.
They're still doing it until pretty recently. I would have thought, like, they would have stopped it in, like, the 1800s. Nope. Continued till, like, modern day.
I did actually, I came across the Ireland-Australia transportation database online. And I seen some of the crimes that people were reported for. This is back then, though. There was a lot of crimes going on around shoes. Like,
really?
Yeah, like the list crimes, it was like stealing a pair of shoes, felony of shoes, felony shoes and trousers. There was also a lot going on with sheep stealing.
Well, I guess sheep were probably like easy animal to steal, so that's why they were stolen most than anything. They're kind of stupid and they're like kind of small that you could probably
throw it up over your shoulder. Off you go. There was one guy that stole a cow. Fair play to him.
Fair play to you. Yeah, probably stole shoes by the way as well, because I mean everybody needs shoes, and they're like you can't. It's very hard to make shoes.
Why did he steal sticks? Him and his dog.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think we should leave it there for that one. All right, thank you so much for listening. It is absolutely sweltering in here. I hope it's hot where you're listening to this podcast, whether you're listening to it in the morning or chilling in the evening. Whether the temperature is hot, I know one thing that's hot, and that's you listening to this episode of the podcast.
Nice.
Thank you. Here, thanks so much for listening. Check out that chapter on YouTube for all sorts of goodies. And yeah, I guess we'll kind of just round it up. All right, thanks guys. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Love you.
Bye.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.